All righty. Well, welcome everybody. We are, I was just talking with Josh about where we are in this process, and we are in September, and our last advisory committee meeting for the ADUs in Denver project is supposed to be in November. So we have 2 meetings after today slated to just do the final wrapping up. And today we start the process of really the wrapping up process of looking at the recommendations that are starting to be under development. So before we dive in, I feel like it's been a while since we checked in with each other, and we're maybe a smaller group so far. And I just wonder if we could just do a quick round of like one piece of good news in your life this week. So how about we just do that? And we'll just do everyone, you can just remind everyone your name, or everyone knows each other by now, but any, your neighborhood, your organization, and one good piece of news. How about extra credit points if you can stick an ADU in there, but no pressure. I'll start. Ryan Golton from CBI, and my middle schooler, my son, is finally starting to maybe enjoy middle school a little bit after 3 weeks. That's my good news, although I am going to New Mexico and staying in my friend's ADU in a few weeks. So that was 2, I'm sorry. Okay, let's go to Sarah, Gabe, and then Jenny, and we'll just do a quick go around.
Yeah, Sarah Cinderhoff with L&D Construction, and I'm excited. We are wrapping up a new construction home that we're building this week, and it's a 2-story home with a basement ADU, and it's the first basement ADU that we've done.
Very cool.
Gabe Cauldron with Berkeley Regis United Neighbors organization, and one good piece of news was attending the open house. It was good to see everyone in person and kind of, interact with the public, and that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And then let's go to Gosha, and then Ozzy, and then Councilwoman Black.
I guess good news is that the school semester started, and I love seeing students and everybody in person. I've also undertaking the biggest project I've ever had to work on, and it's due in 7 days. So that's the good news, is that I get to be done with it soon.
And that you're here tonight. Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Gosha.
Yes, thank you. Gosha Kang, I'm an architect with KTGY, and my ADU news is that last night planning board recommended that another neighborhood will be rezoned to allow ADUs. Councilwoman Sandoval in District 1 has been doing these legislative rezonings, and this was the 4th one that she brought in front of us. So while the city is not implementing citywide, she is doing it one neighborhood at a time, and seems like the process is going smoother each time, and there's less opposition, and kind of great to see the support being built, and also the case study kind of being formulated, right? That it's not a catastrophe. Not everybody is gonna build an ADU overnight. There's not gonna be a quadrupling of the population in the neighborhood. And anyways, it's just she's doing great work, and it was good to recommend approval of another neighborhood.
Thank you. Thanks for the update. That's great. Ozzy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Ozzy Friedrich with Radix Design, and from the Baker neighborhood. Our good news is the Baker neighborhood home tour featuring ADUs was fantastic. Got to see 3 amazing ones that I'd never seen before, and I survived hosting people in my carriage house as part of it, which, oh my gosh, that was such a spam that we get it ready for like hundreds of people to walk through. Anyway, it was so great to see those of you who came. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you. Councilwoman Black, and then we'll go to Rosemary, and then Lisa and Tara.
Hey, I'm Kendra Black, and my good news is that tomorrow the high temperature is going to be in the 70s, and then it's going to be in the 50s. And then maybe we'll actually transition into fall.
I love it. Thank you for reminding us all. Go ahead. So Lisa, did I say you? How about you and then Tara?
My name is Lisa Karen Welch. I'm with ADU for You. And my good news is that our permit package went into the city a little bit over a week ago for the build of our personal accessory dwelling unit in our backyard. And we are super excited to be breaking ground on that.
Congratulations. Tara, and then we'll go to Michelle and Donna and Chelsea.
Hi, I'm Tara Mazio. I'm an architect with Stantec and the founder of Alley Flats. I'm a resident of City Park West. I don't know, they're like all the news in my world right now seems good, but not earth shattering. Mostly right now, I'm really excited that my second grader has started school and is happy there. And he goes to downtown Denver Expeditionary School, where they kind of rely on a camping trip each semester. And I'm going to be his chaperone or one of the chaperones next week. So that'll be cool.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
That's so great. Thank you. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, I think that was next. Well, it's good to be with everybody. My good news is I'm going to become a mother-in-law. My son just got engaged. That's the first time.
A mother-in-law. Congratulations. Wow. Thank you. Donna and then Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. Donna Rep. And my good news is that my mother's home sold. So now I can pay for her long-term care. So it's a huge, huge, huge relief.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Chelsea, and then Darcy, Emily, and Renee.
Hi, sorry I was a little late today. I'm Chelsea from Habitat for Humanity, and my good news is, well, as you can hear, probably my son is pushing a toy right now, and the good news is he's not crying right now. Oh, well, currently he's not crying. I'm also excited for the weather to cool down, so that's also some good news.
Thank you. Darcy, and then Emily and Renee.
Well, sorry, I apologize for being so late. I'm painting my basement and it's hot. But my good news is that I just had the surveyors come out so that I can do a site improvement to build an ADU in the back of my house. Yay!
Congratulations. Go ahead, Emily, and then Renee.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Goodman. I'm the Housing Assistance Manager at East Colfax Community Collective. I apologize as well for being a little late. My good news is that I'm actually moving into my new place tomorrow. So I'm very excited about that, and it'll be really good.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Renee.
Good afternoon. Renee Martinez-Stone with the Denver Housing Authority. My good news going with this theme is I just moved last Thursday, and so just getting settled as well. I'm grateful for that.
That's a lot of moving from this group. Congratulations. All right, so who did I miss? Naomi, did we hear from you yet?
Yeah, I can speak up.
Go ahead.
Hey, everybody. My good news is that one of my really good friends here in Denver is about to have a baby, and she's due today. I don't think it's going to happen, but anyway, I'm really excited for her, and I'm excited to be kind of an auntie.
That is the best. Being an auntie is the best. Thank you. And Rosemary.
Thank you. You almost forgot me, Ryan.
No, I remembered, but then I saw your hand also.
So I'm going to repeat kind of what Ozzy said. I took two of my friends who are architects on the Baker Historic Neighborhood Tour, and it was fabulous. I mean, it was so great to see what people have done creatively, creating ADUs and be able to actually go inside and do a little critiquing sort of get some more ideas, good ideas, not so good ideas. But anyway, just wanted to tell everybody that. It was great.
Oh, so glad. Okay, did I miss any committee members before quick check-in with the staff? Josh, do you want to do a quick hello and good news and pass the baton?
Hey guys, yeah, good to see everyone. Josh Palmieri, city staff. Good news is I've got some friends from back home coming to visit me next week, so looking forward to catching up with old friends. Let's go to Abe.
Hi, Abe Barge, city staff. I missed the Baker tour. I'm sorry, so that's not my good news. I'm just going to go with the weather. I'm happy. Things are changing.
And I am Libby Kaiser, senior city planner. And while in Salt Lake City last weekend, I went on a very harrowing hike to a cave, and I'm just glad I didn't fall off the ledge.
We are so glad, Libby, that you did not fall off the ledge. Elisa.
Yeah, I'm Elisa Childress and I'm associate city planner. My good news is that my air conditioning has been broken for the last 3 days and they're fixing it tomorrow. Thank God.
Wow, just in time for the like 50s to hit.
Exactly.
All right, thanks everyone. And my colleague Sinead is also on. She's taking notes. She's off the camera because she's attending to some other things as well. All right, well, thank you for being here. I think everyone who's joining has joined at this point. And so just a little reminder about what we're doing tonight. So as you remember, we, in May and June in the spring, we were identifying issues and barriers that needed to be addressed in this process. Over the summer, we looked at possible strategies and options. And tonight we start looking at concrete proposals from the city for you all to really provide your input on. Now that you will see them as a package, the city is going to walk you through some charts and maps so you can sort of compare what the rules were before, what they may be changed to be based on your input, and then some graphics to actually show you what that would look like. So it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of info and a lot of visuals, and then we're going to check in with you going through proposed changes for the urban context for Urban Edge and also for the suburban context. We'll present, the staff will present the proposed changes, and then we'll check in with you. What do you think? How well do the proposals meet the goals that we've talked about as a group and your concerns? Do a quick polling exercise for each one of those, and then we'll wrap up at the end with some citywide proposed changes. We'll talk about what's going to happen in October, and a reminder that our last meeting will be in November. And then we'll close. But the first thing we're going to do actually is, in addition to hearing just a quick recap from the last meeting, is to hear about the open house that happened on August 25th, a couple weeks, like 10 days ago, which was awesome. And I actually got to meet several of you in the flesh, which is really very exciting. So that's sort of how it's going to look tonight. Just a reminder for the folks who are attending from the public. I know that this is a less than satisfying experience as a member of the public on a Zoom webinar. So thank you so much for being here. We've made it so that you all can have a live question and answer session with city staff as we go. So please feel free to populate questions. Staff will put in answers during the meeting, and then we use those questions and answers as part of the meeting summary. We also will have a few minutes for public comment and questions at the very end. So I'll turn to you if you all have any questions or comments at the end of the meeting. And otherwise, just a reminder for everyone to use the chat function, all the committee members, and we'll just pause periodically for questions as we go. So I think that's all I wanted to say. Josh, any preliminary comments before we launch in here?
I don't think so. Yeah, let's get rolling.
Okay, great. So I think I'm going to turn to Libby here to just do a quick reminder of what we discussed at the last meeting. And Libby, you all should be able to share your screen. Yeah, there you go, Josh. Perfect.
All right, yeah, take it away, Libby.
There we go. Yeah. Let me just unmute myself.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. So yeah, at our last meeting in August, we provided summaries of our focus group meetings, one that honed in on ADU concerns in the suburban context, and then another group that was comprised of architects and builders to discuss a range of design issues. And we haven't held any other focus group meetings since then, but we do know that there is some interest in following up with those groups, particularly as we develop our proposed solutions. And we'll definitely let you know if there's an opportunity to participate in any future focus groups. And then after providing a summary on the focus groups, we delved into 4 primary areas of discussion. And I'll just recap these briefly since we're going to revisit these topics tonight. The first of these topics focused on allowing ADUs in more suburban zone districts, since only one suburban zone district currently allows them. And we discussed customizing the building form standards like height to be more sensitive to the suburban context. And Josh will present the proposed standards later in this presentation. Then the rest of the topics focused on the use allowances for ADUs, including the owner occupancy requirements, which, as a reminder, a property owner today that has an ADU has to live in either the primary house or the ADU. And if they move out, then that ADU has to be decommissioned, which means the kitchen or the bathroom or utilities have to be removed so the unit is no longer livable. And this rule today only applies to single unit zone districts, and we are considering eliminating it altogether. While it did seem like most members of this committee supported removing the owner occupancy requirement, we do know that there are still some concerns, particularly that it could potentially tip neighborhoods from more homeowners to more renters, and maybe another reason why neighbors would oppose ADUs. Another use allowance centered around whether we should allow ADUs as accessory to dwellings other than single unit homes. Even though ADUs are allowed in 2-unit and multi-unit zone districts today, they are not allowed as an accessory use to duplexes or row homes, and staff is considering changing that. This committee did encourage us to continue to explore this idea, but there were also some concerns regarding what it would look like, and folks wanted us to ensure desirable design outcomes. Finally, we discussed the allowable square footage of ADUs, which ranges from 650 to 1,000 square feet, depending on lot size. We've heard from many of you since the beginning of this project that 600 square feet in particular might be too limiting, and you'll hear from Josh later on how we're proposing to increase the square footage allowance. Next, I'll pass it off to Abe to recap the public open house.
Thank you, Libby. Several of you attended the open house on August 25th, and we had a great turnout overall. It was really fun to see everyone. Just the way it was set up is, Rudy checked in and could put dots on where they lived on a neighborhood map. And when you look at those dots, it's kind of all over the city. And then picked up like a survey worksheet, which had questions that related to like 5 general stations around the room that had like 10 presentation boards. And you answered questions on your worksheet as you talked to us and talked to the committee members that were there and looked at the information that was on the boards. We had several of the boards were just background information, and we'll show you a couple of examples of the information that was on those boards in a minute, including where their ADUs are allowed, where they're being built, some information about what we heard so far, like on the earlier survey that we did. Then we had a description and illustration of pretty much all the major issues and the associated potential solutions that we've discussed mostly at the last 2 committee meetings, and that Libby was going over some of the more interesting ones a minute ago. And then we actually just had one board where we're kind of acknowledging that there are a number of issues that we continue to hear about that are outside the immediate scope of the project, but just want to make sure folks feel free to talk to us about those things and that we're cataloging them for potential next steps in the future. Those are things that are like outside of a zoning amendment, like figuring out if water tap fees could be lower for ADUs, or, you know, making sure that we're doing what we can with additional costs that can arise when you're doing an ADU or other construction project on your property, like having to improve the sidewalk. I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is just an example of one of the pieces of information that was on an open house board that's maybe we haven't, as the committee, seen exactly the same information in a meeting yet. So it's interesting that, like, breaking down where ADUs are being built by zone district and by neighborhood context across the city. 77% of all ADUs are being built in the urban neighborhood context. Maybe that's not especially shocking, but it's a pretty high percentage. Very low percentage in the suburban neighborhood context, but of course, that's largely because there just aren't places where it's actually permitted in the suburban neighborhood context right now, where ADUs are permitted. You can go on to the next slide, Josh. And here we see the map of where ADUs are permitted. That's the sort of greenish color. So those are all the single unit zone districts with a 1 at the end, as well as all the zone districts that allow more than that, like 2 unit, row house, on up through mixed use districts. And then I don't think the whole committee maybe has seen this specific map before, where actually where they're allowed is overlaid with where they're actually being built. And so in some cases, you see dots for where ADUs have been permitted that are not in one of those green areas. Those would be places where an individual property owner has rezoned and then received a permit for an ADU. So you can kind of see that really, for the most part, where the ADUs are being built actually are in the neighborhoods where ADUs are permitted across the whole neighborhood, as opposed to ADUs that resulted from individual rezonings, although there are a few of those as well. All right, Josh, you go on. If you're able.
I think you did. Can you not see?
Okay, yeah, it just updated for me.
Oh, okay.
So these, there's a few slides that actually just show the questions that were on the worksheet that actually had like a numerical response. There were some open-ended questions as well. I won't go through all of these because that would take way too long, but I think maybe you get the picture just from looking at the questions that are on this screen, that generally speaking, the responses were quite supportive on the worksheets that we received. And I will note that we're asked, all of these same questions are in an online survey that we're describing as an online version of the open house that's open now, and it'll be open through September 16th. And after we finish this part of the presentation, I'll actually just check in on where those results are, just to kind of get a flavor in case we have time to talk about it later. In general, when I looked earlier, the responses weren't quite so positive as this, but overall it was looking pretty positive. All right, let's go to the next slide, Josh. And so now we're basically, one thing here is that we asked questions by context, by neighborhood context, and urban edge, and then on to suburban. As you'll recall, like, the solutions that we've been looking at pretty much just make things more flexible for urban and urban edge neighborhood zone districts. And the responses are very supportive. When we ask, for example, do you support allowing a detached ADU to have a full second story in an urban edge neighborhood? The average was 4.7 on a scale of 0 to 5. So quite supportive. However, like the two questions that are on the right-hand side of the screen were about what we've put out as potential solutions for the suburban context. One of them was actually, we think we should probably just reduce the height allowance to 1 story based on, especially the suburban neighborhood focus group we had and other conversations. The response, not nearly so positive. I mean, it's really kind of right in the middle. And the same with the other question we asked, which is, well, what if the rear setback was greater in a suburban neighborhood? So Josh, and we'll stop for just in a minute for questions as well. Then these are just responses on remaining questions that we asked. The one question, the last one, question 16, was about allowing ADUs as accessory to more than just single unit uses, such as duplexes and row houses. It's still pretty positive. It's a little less positive than the responses to the others, so it'll be interesting to see what we get in the online survey.
And Abe, do you see Naomi's question about, were there any open-ended questions that could add any nuance about why people may have not have been as supportive for the suburban questions in particular, or from the district?
There were, yeah, and I think it's going to be especially helpful in the online surveys because we'll have a much greater sample there. Like there's only a little over 20 of these worksheets that are generating these numbers here, and I think we're already well into the 100 or hundreds in the online survey. But if you go to the next slide, there's actually a few samples of responses on the open-ended questions. Just like, been talking about reuse of an existing structure, where we've said that a potential solution to the issue of like having to knock down a garage or not being able to reuse it is to just have special allowances for that. The people saying like, yeah, just expressing like, yes, but maybe there should be special like review to make sure that those things fit in, and maybe just a little bit of concern about some nuance with reuse of existing structures. And then if you, well, I'll also note on this one, the note about allowing patios, which is something that I think, Josh, we might not really get into that until our meeting next month, but that's something we've heard in a few cases. And if you go to the next one, I think you'll see that ADUs in suburban neighborhoods. And so, like, for example, a person who was not strongly supportive of the more limiting solutions that we suggested for suburban neighborhoods, saying that ADUs are probably more needed in suburban areas than urban areas to reduce car trips. And just another comment about inadvertently increasing some barriers. So clearly, quite a few of the folks that completed the workshop were really excited about the opportunity that ADUs presented, and were concerned about introducing any barriers in suburban. And I think that's why the responses weren't as positive.
And Abe, before we sort of launch in then to what's being proposed tonight, is now a good time to just open it up for a couple minutes to see if any committee members who are there want to add observations? Oh, do you have more? Okay, sorry.
More.
Yeah, so just, like, for example, that last bullet point there, we had one workshop participant who, he brought an actual diagram of the lot condition in Baker, and, it's just a good acknowledgement that sometimes there are really unusual situations in which certain rules that we haven't talked very much about, like that you need to build a detached ADU only on the rear 35% of the lot, can really get in the way, because what's going to be considered the rear 35% of the lot just isn't somewhere you could build anything. So that's just something we should look at a little further. And if you go to the next slide, Josh, yeah, great stopping point, right?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much there, and thank you for sharing it. So several of you committee members were there. Does anyone have anything they want to, just reflections, observations, anything to add to what Abe said? Rosemary?
So I think that the boards were done extremely well. I really like the fact that you separated out the issues that really cannot be addressed in this project. I thought that was really great because I think that's a common issue that people keep bringing up. I did, I sort of listened to people talking. So I listened to people who are looking at the suburban zone district, and two of those people were in the focus group, and they felt like the recommendations that came out of that focus group were pretty right on. So I think it's really surprising to see the survey, from these 21 people that was really contrary to what that focus group seemed to indicate. I did hear a few negative comments. One was people cheated that they were putting numerous dots in certain sections to, sort of weight their responses. And another comment that I heard, and I think those of us who have worked in with the city before, I mean, we've heard this before from people in the neighborhood, that the city has an idea what they're going to do. It's a done deal. And this is merely window dressing. So I just wanted to, that's what I heard.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Rosemary. And just to note, the numeric that average number that was on the previous slides is just from the worksheets. It's not from counting up dots on poster boards, which we can separately look at that, but I agree it would be much less reliable because some people put a lot of dots on there and other people didn't put any.
Any comments from, I think, Rosemary, it's helpful, I think, to hear, what people's concerns are and sort of this worry that the process is rigged and sort of a done deal. But I think probably, the folks on this call sort of know that there has been some, discussion about things, but Gosha, you wanted to chime in and then we'll see if anyone else wants to add.
Yeah, thank you. A couple questions. So the first one, and maybe you said it and I missed it, but when you were going over the numbers of ADUs built, and I think the total was somewhere around 450, is this a total number since 2010 new zoning code adoption, or what's the time bracket that you are tracking that information?
Yeah, that's right. It should be dated there at 2010.
Okay.
And that does
So
include attached and detached as well.
So it's a total number since the new zoning code 2010. Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. And the other question is about the survey results. So it seems like the questions that were kind of pointing towards relaxing regulations and maybe allowing for greater height or greater flexibility were far more positively received, as opposed to the questions that related to restricting ADUs specifically in the suburban district. I wonder if you have any thoughts or kind of an interpretation of why that is.
Yeah, the good question. And, Rosemary brought up that the folks that she talked to that were at the suburban focus group thought, actually were supportive of the potential solutions that we presented. And, I just looked at all the responses on those suburban neighborhood questions, and it is quite split between, several people were a 5, like strongly support, and several people were a 0, like they really, really didn't support it. And so it ended up just kind of averaging out right in the middle. And that's perhaps not too surprising. I think that's something that we need to dig into a little bit more. I do have the sense that, a lot of residents who live in suburban neighborhoods are fairly cautious about ADUs coming in, but citywide, there is generally a lot of support for ADUs and removing barriers. And so one possibility is that, the responses that are saying, you know, it's too restrictive are coming from people who don't live in suburban neighborhoods, but maybe not. I think we'll have more information from the online survey where we can also, you know, we'll have a much bigger sample and kind of look at like, where do people actually live that are being really supportive versus less supportive?
Yeah,
And I
that's
don't know what that'll mean we should do in the end, but it's all information, you know, to kind of support a discussion.
right. And it's interesting if you overlay it with the information about where ADUs are currently built, and knowing that only 1% of ADUs are currently built in the suburban context. So that may be pointing to lack of familiarity, right? That people who live in urban neighborhoods are much more accustomed to this form and the kind of implications, and much more less fearful maybe, or wary of something that's unknown, as opposed to the suburban.
So I'm sorry to step in here, but I'm also wanting us to transition to start hearing the presentation so that we have time for your input on the proposals. So Gosha, I didn't mean to cut you off. I don't know if you had another question. And Sarah, I think I saw you raise your hand. Would you all be willing to hold them until later? Is there anything pressing that you want to get to? Okay, thank you both so much. All right. Josh, I think if it's okay, we'll pass it to you to start us off on the proposed strategies you want folks to look at tonight.
I guess, is it still Abe on this one? Do you have these, Abe, as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So just to introduce, like moving forward, we've talked about pretty much the whole spectrum, I think, of major issues, and at least had a preliminary discussion about potential solutions. But now we want to just try to bring it all together and just kind of see what it ultimately would result in form-wise, making all of these changes together, making sure that, you know, we can, we're addressing the issues and goals that we've discussed so far. You know, part of it is removing the barriers, and the other part being like making sure that ADUs fit in to a variety of contexts. And then also we talked about last time just that, you know, we're thinking internally, staff, as we put these together, like there are multiple ways of solving any potential issue. And so we want to just choose the tools that are like the most directly related and effective, make sure that they're as equitable as they can be, that they preserve as much flexibility as they reasonably can, and ultimately are easy enough to understand that, you know, both homeowners and their neighbors can predict basically what's actually possible on their lot or the lot next door. So that's, Josh is going to start bringing it all together, and then we'll have discussion about where we are.
Yeah, thanks, Abe. All right, well, we're going to take a look at lots of the proposals, the recommendations we have in place, and it's going to get a bit technical pretty soon. We're going to look at a lot of charts and graphs, but quickly wanted to just overview once again for everyone what we've been talking about, which direction we've been moving into, and hopefully none of this, you know, is a surprise, but more of a reminder. We've heard pretty clearly that some of the form issues that we have with ADU, that is to say the building form, you know, the outcome of what is built, is running into issues. We need to look at removing the minimum lot size, make sure that all properties are at least eligible for an ADU. Maybe, you know, the lot size isn't that practical to build one, so they might not, but zoning shouldn't dictate whether or not people, you know, have that flexibility on their property or not. We've heard pretty clearly that we should allow for 2 stories, a full 2-story allowance in the urban and urban edge contexts. We also have heard quite a bit that we need some flexibility for the smaller, narrow lots where the bulk plane sort of gets in the way. Some of the setbacks become an issue. Square footage allowance could use some help, and these lots are typically, you know, in our urban areas, walkable, transit-rich communities where ADUs are popular and a good fit for infill. We've heard pretty clearly that we should make it easier to build single-story ADUs. Definitely a goal of ours. That's the, you know, more affordable product of a dwelling unit versus having to do the parking below 2-story. So we want to get the zoning rules out of the way of that. And we also need to create those brand new suburban ADU zone districts. So we looked at that map and saw that, not many ADUs have been built in the suburban context, and they're not allowed in many of them. And we don't even have the appropriate zone districts to rezone into. So we're looking at what those will look like today as well. So these are specifically the building form changes. Here's just a quick example of, what that might look like. So a quick before and after, looking at like a 1.5 story detached ADU on the left versus a potential 2-story on the right, with some of those changes applied. We'll look at it in more detail per context as we go, but just as a quick visual of, some of the modeling we might see in tonight's meeting. We're also looking at a bunch of use changes as well. Libby touched on these at the very beginning. So this idea of allowing ADUs as accessory to more uses other than single unit, that is to say 2-unit and row homes. So with a duplex and a row house, removing that owner occupancy requirement since it only applies in single unit. It's the direction we're going now. Also looking at increasing the use allowance in square footage. And so here on the right is the actual code section. This is kind of the language that we deal with and we'll have to modify. We're just sort of highlighting for you guys to start to familiarize yourself as what we'll see in the future when we do sort of submit those final red lines to review. Here's the code language that calls out, in all zone districts, accessory to a primary single unit dwelling use is the only allowance currently for an ADU. So we would look at modifying this language or expanding it to, 2-unit and row home, potentially eliminating this section, but just to make sure we're all on the same page at that recommendation. Also looking at, once again, removing that owner occupancy requirement that exists also in this use section under single unit zone districts only. Line item C here says that the owner of the zone lot on which the ADU use is maintained must occupy either the primary or the ADU. We're looking at removing that language, increasing the use allowance in single unit. So we have the table here that has the breakdown of what's allowed per lot size. We're looking at modifying those use allowances as well. And then there's a newer one here at the bottom that we haven't specifically discussed in this committee, but we've heard quite a bit that we have some equity issues and just administrative issues around this overcrowding rule that's also within the uses. It says, that's line item E here, to avoid overcrowding in an ADU, that the ADU should contain 200 square feet of gross floor area per occupant. So that is to say, if you happen to have a 540 square foot ADU, you and your partner, you have a child, are you suddenly, you have to leave the ADU? Can you not live there? You're like, who are we as the city or the zoning regulatory to dictate that standard? And so the proposal would look something like this, removing that language that no longer needed, that we are recommending to move forward as this committee, and changing that sort of use allowance in square footage just up to the next threshold. So if your lot size is up to 7,000 square feet, you'd be allowed to have up to 864 square feet of ADU use. Anything above 7,000 square feet would have 1,000 square feet as their allowance. Of course, there's all the other rules around building form and footprint and height that we'll look at later, but these are specifically the use discussions. Is there any quick questions on any of that moving forward?
And everyone should feel free to use the chat. Thank you, Naomi, for comments or questions as we go. But Josh, I don't see any hands up. So I think you can keep going.
Cool, yeah, okay, well, let's jump into our initial draft strategy here we'll start off with the urban context. So as Abe mentioned, this is where we're seeing most of our activity as far as ADU permits and interest, lots of rezonings, lots of legislative rezonings and things like that. Just a reminder, the draft strategy, what's important here, remove that minimum lot size across the board, allow 2 stories in urban context, create some of that flexibility for smaller, narrow lots. And of course, we want to make it easier to build single story ADUs as well in this context. So here's a quick look at the existing requirements. So this is a breakdown of the zoning, what's on the books for us, the zoning chart. This is the building form table. You can see here we've got each zone district in a separate column. So It's goes from the smallest lot size in the city, A, all the way to, you know, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever exists in that context. So B being the next largest lot size, C being larger than that. And these are the current rules that we have. Just a quick breakdown. We want to show you, get familiar with what it looks like, the things that we'll be modifying and changing. We're going to look at some of the specific dimensional standards that we'll be proposing here. I've also got some anecdote on the bottom that is not a part of the zoning form table, but just for folks to know that there's a number of parcel counts. We're doing a lot of looking at, you know, what's built where, but the potential number of parcels that could be affected by, you know, the changes in these zone districts. So looking at something like the C zone district that has the most parcels in this context, at least at 18,000, has only seen about 70 ADU permits, but you know, that entire zone district is not zoned for ADUs, so something to keep in mind. But looking at a quick example of USU B1, this is where we've seen about 25% of all ADUs that have been permitted, so a very popular zone district for ADU construction permits and activity. We do have about 6,700 properties that are currently zoned for ADUs, so we've seen about 100 there. But here's just a quick breakdown of the rules. You know, it covers the height in stories, feet, how tall you can go, the description of the bulk plane, where it starts, the angle it takes, the minimum lot size requirement for that lot, building coverage, setbacks, and things like that. So looking at some of those changes that, you know, we're looking at this draft strategy that we're focused on. First thing we've heard, you know, is to remove that minimum lot size citywide. So we can do that, easily modify the line item here, the row on lot size, also extending that building coverage exemption to currently, you know, it only applies when vehicular storage is provided, parking on the ground floor. So we'd be looking at modifying that. The change from there would be removing that minimum lot size requirement across the board, no longer applying to any of those districts. Extending the building coverage exception to 50% of the ADU or up to 500 square feet, regardless of whether there's parking or not. Another item that we've heard from like the architects and some builders is that the building length maximum sort of becomes an issue. It used to be set at 36 feet across the board, which just kind of matched the garage limitation. We've heard that that actually, you know, gets in the way of making a single story ADU a little bit easier to build. It might make more sense to do a longer, skinnier building depending on your lot size. And so what's wrong with 38 feet of ADU for something like that? And so here's some of the rules that I'll be changing to modify to start to help out with these two goals. The next one is, you know, allowing that full 2 stories in urban and urban edge. So across the board, this entire context will allow 2 stories. Same height and feet requirements. So we're not actually increasing the height allowance, but allowing that second story to be a full habitable square footage of floor area. And then we're looking closely at that added flexibility for some of our smaller and more narrow lots. And so the A and the B zone districts are our narrow lot districts. And so that's where we'd be looking at modifying the bulk plane height up to 2 feet, up to 12 from 10, just to give it a little bit more room to actually make that second floor habitable. Would also be increasing that use allowance up to the next threshold. So as we looked at in that use chart, 650 is no longer the minimum use. We'd move it up to 864. The other district that we would look at is the URH, which is, you know, certain neighborhoods like Baker and Curtis Park actually have those zoning designations, and there's lots of single family homes there that would like to add an ADU, but they also have very small, narrow lots and run into some of these issues. I would actually look at just waiving the bulk plane entirely for that zone district. URH means, you know, that's a place where you could build a row home if your lot size allows it. And so what could be built as a row home is generally much greater than a single family house back there. And so we feel that it's fairly appropriate to loosen up the restrictions in that zone district. So here's a quick example again of what that looks like. So on the left, we sort of broke down what exactly would be changing. So I know there's a lot of lines in here that aren't changing at all, a lot of rows that are just the same text across the board. We would be changing things on the narrow lots. So the A and the B, we're looking at that height and stories. We're looking at raising the bulk plane up to 2 feet and potentially modifying the side setback for the B lot designation. Lot size, as you know, goes, building coverage applies everywhere, building length goes. We're also looking at an allowance for the rear setback to be 0 on lots that don't actually have a garage door. This is the same allowance for a garage today. So if you're not pulling a vehicle in and to and out of the structure, you can actually just get that 5 feet back and build your structure at the very back of your property.
And Josh, can I step in real quick? There's a couple questions in the chat and they might be better addressed at the end, but I just wanted to call your attention to them in case at any point you want to address them. So the most recent one is from Councilwoman Black. Curious about the feedback received about changing from 1.5 to 2 stories, and that she's heard concerns from folks who live in urban neighborhoods about their loss of privacy if the second story, which is now larger, looms over the neighbor's yard. There was, so anyway, you don't have to answer those now, but just to put that on your radar, there's another question earlier as well.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be great for our discussion coming up. All good points.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to get into those.
Okay, perfect. So, so keep them coming in the chat and we'll refer back to them in a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, the balance we're going for here. It's the question of, does this 1.5 story, actually create more privacy than a 2-story next to it? That's the sort of question, yeah, we'd love to get into. We've got lots of images and renderings for us to discuss, but definitely. So yeah, just quickly highlighting some of those, the bulk plane raising on the right here, we would be enabling a larger structure, something a little bit more habitable. Currently, it's very hard to get to that full, even, what used to be a 650 square foot allowance. It's hard to get that habitable square footage in these structures with the setback limitations and things that exist. And so looking at loosening up those restrictions just on the narrow lots, remember, so this is just A and B. It's only, what was it? 15,000 parcels citywide when we're talking about the entire city being 100,000 parcels. Keep in mind, the percentage of properties we're talking about here. These are sort of things we would be looking at loosening up, 2-story potential.
Sorry, Josh, to interrupt. Gosha is noting that the 2-story ADU doesn't look like it has an actual ceiling height of 8 feet on the second floor. Does it? Or I think that she was referring to this visual.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's sloping obviously in multiple places, but yeah, I mean, it's habitable essentially to the edges. Yeah. The square footage count is an 864 square foot footprint. And so, yeah, the subtracted square footage would be where it's less than the habitable height.
Okay.
Quite technical, good eye, Goja. But also, besides the 2-story, we're also looking at allowing more single-story opportunities. And so the thing on the right here is difficult to build with that, building coverage exemption. If someone wanted to build the more economical ADU without providing parking within the structure, but wanted to maximize that potential footprint, we're starting to try to enable things like this on the smaller lots. Yeah, so just one last example. So the most prominent lot size in the urban context is our C lot size, as I mentioned. USUC is the most common zone district, or most number of parcels, 18,000 parcels. Currently, there's about 5,000 properties that are actually zoned for ADUs. We've only seen about 70 permits issued to date. We wanted to just take a look at what these new rules would look like and what exactly are we changing on, the most prominent lot size in this context. So what exactly are we changing? We're basically just saying that, yes, now you can have a full 2 stories. Zone lot size, minimum is not there. No one's ineligible for a detached ADU. You're allowed to have the building coverage exemption for housing. The rear setback could go to 0 if you don't have a garage, but most folks are actually providing parking in here, and we're removing the building length. And so at the end of the day, we're only modifying 5 line items to the zoning code in this lot size, this context right now. And here's essentially what the result is. It's a question whether or not, does that modify that much? Is the change that much greater than what's already existing? Or is it even enough? right? We want to know, are we doing something that's actually striking a balance of removing some barriers to ADU construction, but also remaining sensitive to the neighborhood context. So here's just a quick couple of views and a reminder of exactly what's changing, but I think now's a really good time to, yeah, let's open it up and have that discussion about the appropriateness. Does 2 stories feel any different? Does it have any greater privacy impact versus a 1.5 story? I think a lot of folks on the committee, a lot of builders, people that are experienced with it would say, not really. I mean, we're getting quite similar impacts with added cost of construction and detailing. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys. I'm happy to switch back to the larger table and spend any time where we need to.
So maybe what we'll do is take just a few comments and questions about these slides and what you just presented. And then within a couple minutes, we're gonna put up a poll that just sort of takes your temperature on these things. Just not because we're trying to get consensus here, but we just want to get everyone's just a quick snapshot of how you're feeling about it. So Rosemary, I see your hand up, and then we have a couple questions and notes in the chat. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, this is kind of like a fire hose of information, and it's hard just instantaneously to take it in and give a really considered response. But one of the things I'm concerned about is in the open house, when you showed the 2-foot increase on the sidewall and then going up to the bulk, going up, it looked very different than these. So what I would like to see is, what does that 2-story look like if you're standing in the neighbor's backyard versus the 10-foot wall in the neighbor's backyard? It's, bird's eye view is pretty useless. I mean, it's really pretty. This helps, but I want to see what it looks like next door.
Sure, yeah, good thoughts. And this meeting here, yeah, I agree. It's a lot of information. We do have 2 meetings for this phase of the project for our strategy. So don't worry, there'll be more discussion or more time to discuss at our next committee meeting as well. So thanks for that feedback.
And Josh, maybe it might be too much to try to do it this time, but we could consider actually switching the screen to the SketchUp model that this came from, and we could go wherever Rosemary would like to go and look at things from any angle, really, if you want.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we have that ability to, fly around, walk around the model if need be.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah, and to your point, Rosemary, yeah, so the bulk plane increase, remember that's only happening on the A and B lot sizes. And so let's just, consider where exactly in the city that is applying. We do have maps of those locations, so we can look at, which neighborhoods that actually, what that means and where that is. But yeah, that wouldn't apply to C or greater. And so the only thing that's changing in this district essentially are these 5 line items. But yeah, it's good feedback.
Ozzy, go ahead.
Exciting to see the language on all of this. The first glance, I'm very excited to see you considering some of the adjustments besides setbacks and to the bulk plans in the urban neighborhoods. I wanted to speak to Councilperson Black's concern regarding the 2-story issue. And I would say in Baker, in our urban row house neighborhood, we have discussed ADU zoning very extensively in our neighborhood meetings. And I think the 2-story restriction or the 1.5-story rule is the thing that people hate most and have the hardest time with. And I don't see that it, taking away that restriction will change the essential character of how ADUs interact with our neighborhoods. It will just make it possible to make them livable and usable. So that's just what we've heard in the neighborhood where people talk about this a lot.
any comments before I go to Gosha? Because I see she has a couple of questions in the chat as well. Thanks, Ozzy. So Gosha, I see that your questions about the bulk plane and the habitability and Josh's initial response. Do you want to say more about that? And then Councilwoman Black, I see your hand up as well.
Yes, yes, thank you. Sorry to be geeking out on the ceiling height, but my understanding about the two-story two-story space, is a two-story building, is that the entire second floor will be defined as a habitable space, meaning it has a minimum of 7 feet ceiling height, and I don't see that happening while we allow the floor, I guess, to be used. But if it's less than 7 feet, then it's not really habitable space. So I think we're kind of back to that, 75% of the floor below being really usable or habitable. And the second question, I saw it in your renderings, but I don't know that I see it in the language of the code presented, is I saw dormers projecting into bulk plane, and is that part of the plan, or?
You're getting ahead of yourself a little bit, Goja. Yeah, we're gonna discuss the interest in dormers later. But yes, I think that's on the table.
That's a
We've heard
preview of
interest in.
coming attractions.
Can you speak to the 7 or the actual habitable space? I guess on the second level, and I do recognize that would probably require modifying the bulk plane, possibly the angle of it, to allow for the bearing wall on the exterior to be at the height that would allow for the ceiling to be at the habitable space height.
Well, no, so yeah, we do have enough habitable space. I mean, in the structure, obviously the form can change. This is if you maxed it out to the setback at 3 feet that we're showing here, nearest to where the bulk plane begins. Obviously the building can be skinnier and longer, therefore increasing that roof height as it goes, right? So this is just, one example of the millions of flexible options, but we found that 12 feet giving you essentially, 15-foot sidewall height should be enough, unless, we feel otherwise. So our recommendation is to add 2 feet to the starting height of the bulk plane in order to accomplish that.
So knowing that, we're just gonna, some of these questions and comments you all may want to come back to, but just to make sure we get to everybody, let's go to Councilwoman Black and then Renee. So yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. So I put that in the chat about privacy, but the other thing I've heard is the shadows on the neighbor's yard, and on narrow lots. I don't know if those shadows are real, if you can model that, but I've heard that from people, particularly people who live in Platt Park. Of course, it's not my district. I don't have any urban neighborhoods in my district, but I do live in that same zip code. So it's pretty close to where both Rosemary and I live. And I've talked to people who live near ADUs, and they just feel like it is looming over their yard next door, and they have lost their privacy. So I don't know if anyone from Platt Park has been part of this at all, but I feel like it's a concern. I know this group is very interested in making these changes, but I'm not sure we're hearing from all those voices.
Do you want to, Josh or Abe or Libby, address just the sort of hearing from those voices question and whether and how you're hearing this input and your thoughts about it at this point? And then we'll go to Renee.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's a lot of perceived concern. I mean, I think what we're proposing here, the, minor 5 line items of code change, allowing a full 2 stories, doesn't have that much greater of a shadow impact nor a privacy impact. I think in our perspective and a lot of the opinions that we're hearing, you could build something, essentially just like this today, but minus 25% of the mass up here. Doesn't mean the windows are going to move any further, and they might be 2 feet away. we're looking at removing barriers to, as far as creating housing options, reducing the cost and things like that. And so it's a question whether, you know, we're prioritizing housing or shade.
Does anyone else from the city want to add before we move on to
Yeah, I
that?
guess, no, I think it's a really good, thanks, Councilwoman Black. Like, we know those concerns are out there, and I think that's going to be like something that we really need to dive into now. Sometimes I feel like, you know, folks who are concerned about ADUs will just sort of say like, no ADUs, they're really not appropriate for my neighborhood. But actually, with the way that the proposal is shaping up and that we actually have something to model now, I'm hopeful that if we could get some folks together, like again with a suburban focus group and maybe more of an urban edge focus group to get like the Platt Park perspective, to actually just really look at some of these changes closely to determine, you know, to what extent like making one of these changes would really greatly affect shading or privacy. And if so, like, you know, I think there's absolutely still time to take that into account and to make some adjustments.
Great. I feel like this issue probably we could talk more about right now, but just for the sake of hearing from everyone, let's go to Renee and Ozzy. I think you had your hand up maybe too, and also Councilwoman Black, I see your hand is up again. So Renee, go ahead and then we'll.
Thanks, Fran. So some of these are really great to see. I'm excited about them. I'd like to go to the setbacks slide if possible, because I have a question about the setbacks.
Yep.
So I'm going to use the SUC zone because that's what we're talking about a lot, and I realize now like it's, yeah, there we go. I think that the recommendation prior or right there that when there's no garage door, the rear setback can be 0 is great. And it's something that is trying to put ADUs more flexible than garages so that we're prioritizing housing people versus garages. So my question then is, why not take that a further step with the side interior setback? Because a garage can be 5 feet, 3 feet, or even 0 feet of that side interior setback, depending upon if it's in the if it's entirely in the back 35%, if it's not, or if it's on an extra wide lot, that side interior can be smaller. And so I would like to have us look at that. And I would love to consider, because the code in USUC1, if you look at the garage section, it calls out like when the lot's bigger. And I think it would be fantastic in this section to say, when the ADU is 1 story, here's the setbacks. And that really gets to some of the issues here about privacy. And a 1-story ADU should not have to comply with the setbacks that are really geared towards 2-story ADUs. So that's really my comment. It helps with privacy, and just a reminder, a lot of people don't want an ADU because they want their open space. So anyway, just thank you for looking at these.
That's really helpful suggestion. And, you know, I'm noticing too that there's really great ideas in the chat, including a possible offer of doing a kind of a ADU tour that looks at, maybe in Curtis Park, that looks at 2-story ADUs, just to see what those sort of the real world implications for neighbors in terms of those. And that Sarah offered to organize. I also heard that there's some, Abe, you mentioned additional focus group meetings possibly. So it seems to me that we should decide tonight if we want to move on at this point to just hear the proposals for Urban Edge and Suburban at this point. I think we maybe should hold off on the polling because I just think there's too much rich discussion and comments. And we can do that next time with possibly the benefit of some of these other actions in between. Josh, I'm going to just sort of put you on the spot in terms of do you want to just at this point keep going and share the thoughts and proposals about Urban Edge and Suburban? And then we'll wrap up with some ideas about what we do with where we go from here.
Definitely. Yeah, we can take a look at.
Because this is really, really great, everybody. Thank you for the nuanced and thoughtful questions and comments.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that feedback. Okay, yeah, so jumping context, let's talk a little bit more about Urban Edge. So the types of neighborhoods we're talking about here, seen on the map, places like Westwood, far northeast Park Hill, these little bits of Denver. East Colfax was just recently rezoned to allow ADUs there. So we've heard similar things, similar goals: remove the minimum lot size, create that equity across the board, create allowances, to create eligibility for detached ADUs, full 2 stories in this context as well, is what we've heard. Still a little concerns about the flexibility potentially on smaller and narrow lots and making it easier to build shorter single story ADUs. Here's the quick breakdown of proposals in this zone district. So everything moving to 2 stories, starting with ESUB, the smallest lot size, up to CD, up into our greater contexts. The parcel number breakdown is interesting here. Not a lot of parcels anywhere besides in the ESUD zone lot size. So think about the size of lot that's being considered there when looking at these structures. All of our proposals pretty much match the last one. The only real modification we have is that idea about small and narrow lots, once again, where ADUs might need a little bit more flexibility. So looking at slightly increasing that bulk plane height on just the B lot size, but also in the row home eligible district here. And looking at shrinking those side setbacks as well. The use allowance would bump up for our smallest lot size there too. But like I mentioned, the most prominent lot size, I mean, in those districts, we're only talking about what, not even 3,000 properties citywide. So just keep a reminder of the impact here, and remember how many permits we've seen. We've seen 1 in all of these properties thus far, and so the impact on something like a lot size like this, the ESUD zone district, could have a much greater impact. 31,000 potential parcels citywide. We've already seen about 34 ADUs permitted here under the existing rules. But once again, we aren't changing all that much in this zone district either. We've got the same 5 line items. So we're saying, yes, you can have a full 2 stories. You're able to have that fully habitable second floor, obviously with the bulk plane and other restrictions abound. But the zone lot minimum is gone. So you're eligible if you have a piece of property and it's feasible to build it, you can build what fits. Lot coverage exemption applies as well. So opening up the opportunity for more single story. Similar concept with the rear setback. If you're not placing a garage door back there, we feel that you can place the structure on the alley and removing that building length. So here's, the quick example of, what could be built before, where you have that potential notch, 25% of your upper story cut out versus what could be built in the future. Fully habitable 2-story structure. Quick example of what that looks like in the neighborhood. So this should give us a good idea of these privacy concerns. Here's what you can actually build today. This is the 1.5 story limitation. So it's on a property across the alley. There's a quick bird's eye view, which, suffice it to say, it does give you a pretty good perspective of the block pattern layout, what could be built. But comparing that to what could be built in the future is the potential 2-story ADU outcome after following these new rules. A couple of perspectives here of that. So here's a full 2-story newly proposed ADU, which will be following these newer regulations. A couple of perspectives here, so you can sort of see a little bit more of the mass, the form that the building could take. So the yellow structures would be the older ADUs pre-existing before the adoption, and then the pink shown here would be ADUs following the new updated rules and regs. Here's another just quick street view to sort of compare. So we're really asking the question, you know, is the ADU on the right with like a lost window there, any have greater impacts than, you know, what can be built today versus that 1.5 story? Do we actually start to begin to strike that balance of removing barriers, but also remaining sensitive to this context? Let's go ahead and discuss.
Okay, wonderful. Tara, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me. This is a bit of a nuance, but maybe worth pointing out. And Josh, I don't know, could you back up maybe a little bit more? One more, another one. Okay, yeah, this is good. So the before 1.5 story ADU, this is it's similar to the one that's in my backyard. And I just like to point out that when there are many ways to comply with the 1.5 stories, but when you do it this way, what this does is it gives the opportunity for windows on that flat facade, yep,
Sure.
right above that lower roof. And what that does is puts people and eyesight directly into neighbors' yards. Whereas in the 2-story, the way that it's currently modeled, and again, there are other ways to solve this architecturally, but the way that's currently modeled, there's actually more privacy because you're not going to put a window on that sidewall when the eave is coming down, probably lower than 7 feet, to kind of Gosha's point. And I know we're going to talk about dormers, but I think those are going to end up being a little bit higher than your view. So again, it's kind of a nuance, Josh, but might be worth pointing out.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, a myriad of ways to design one of these units, and yeah, it does create its own issues and not. So yeah, it's a good question whether the privacy impacts change at all from what's allowed today. We currently feel it's equivalent. But yeah, to your point, it might be even minimized.
Yeah, I agree. It's at least equivalent. And also to Ozzy's earlier point, I agree with that too, that the bulk plane limitations are designed to reduce the impact of shadow on our neighbors' yards. You know, it would be simple enough to study multiple forms that comply with both the 1.5 and 2 stories and show the impact in true shadow studies. And to Councilwoman Black's question, these models can be accurate in terms of their shadow studies. We use them for that. So that would be easy enough to do, Josh, I think.
Thanks, Tara.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're tracking all of this because I think there's a lot of really great suggestions from tonight's meeting in terms of possible follow-up. Darcy, can we go to you next? Because I think your hand is newly up, and then we'll go to Ozzy and then Rosemary.
Sure. My question is based upon this sample, go back to that screenshot there. The accessory dwelling unit, from my understanding, when you're developing, is an accessory to the existing property, which means that it cannot be bigger than the existing property. But this here looks like it could be considered much bigger. So I'm trying to understand how that, I think it's called the total area covered on the property that the existing home is, and then you add in the accessory dwelling unit. How are we going to raise the bulk plane and still be within those confines? I was with the building department a couple of weeks ago, and I was designing something with them. And that was the main concern that they had, was that this was going to be take up more space than is allowed. Are we still taking that into consideration?
No, so currently, you know, the rules today state that the ADU is limited in square footage based on the use limitations that we looked at. Also the footprint limitations. We can look back at the table here. So these are the sort of things that keep it accessory because a primary structure does not have a building footprint maximum, does not have a use allowance. You know, a primary structure like the one in the middle here could be
Right.
4,000 square feet. And so our definition of what we're calling accessory is the allowance of this structure, you know, is accessory. It's subordinate to the allowance of the primary structure. And so, you know, something like this could be built today. If you have, you know, there's a lot of homes in East Colfax that are like 600 square feet. We've talked quite a bit about allowing an ADU as a percentage of the existing structure, but there's a lot of equity issues along with that. You know, we don't want to just enable folks that already have a $4,000 house to build a bigger ADU because, you know, they're rich, they've been privileged. We need to set the rules, you know, equitably across the board. And so we're looking at the allowance, the accessory use being that limiting fact.
Well, the house, let's say the house is 500 square feet and the building footprint for an ADU based upon a particular size of the property, say 4,500 square feet, and we have 650 square feet as a building footprint, that right there automatically is no longer an accessory to a 500 square foot house. It becomes like the primary house now, it's big enough. So I'm wondering how, what we're taking into consideration to adjust for that. The unit is smaller than the ADU.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question, should we? Is that something we should consider as a committee? Do we think we should limit ADUs whenever someone has a small house?
No.
So I'm gonna pause there just to hear from everybody else, but I do think that's something to come back to. So just, I'm gonna note it, but, and others may want to comment on it. Ozzy, then Rosemary, then Renee. Let's hear from you guys.
Okay, could we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
And Ozzy, your audio is a little bit breaking up. You might need to get close. I'm not sure.
Okay, hopefully is this better?
It's clear enough, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there was an idea in the architects and builders focus group that I hope doesn't get lost along the way, which was that ADUs on corner lots, we should consider getting rid of the bulk plane on the side that faces the street. Because right now the bulk plane makes it so that that ADU, like the one pictured here, has its side turned to the street. But if we got rid of the bulk plane on the street side, then it could actually face the street, making it more like a little house that faces its own street. And I think that's better for the streetscape. And in that case, the bulk plane isn't doing anything to protect neighbors from shading or protect neighbors' privacy. It's just there on the street side, even though it's not creating a benefit there. So I would love if people could keep that in place.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting concept.
Rosemary, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions and I have a couple of comments. One of my comments is, could you go back to the previous slide?
Yep.
Right. So I think one of the concerns is not just with the two-story, it's not just privacy. And as Terry pointed out, the 1.5 story, if you have windows there, that, you know, that's a privacy issue, although they could be clerestory windows or etched or something like that. But there's also a sense of open space that when I look at these, the two-story is very massive. It sort of cuts down on your sense of open space. So that's my comment about that one. It would be great to see the 17-foot, the 1-story from next door versus the 2-story from next door and see how that changes kind of the feel in the backyard. And then I have a question about to incentivize single-story ADUs am I understanding this correctly, that it's kind of to treat the ADU like we treat garages? Is that because garages have an incentive? Is that, am I confused?
Yeah, that's approximately right. Yeah, it's the lot coverage, the building coverage exception is what it's considered, only currently applies. You're allowed to write off 50% of the structure up to 500 square feet, but only if vehicular storage is provided. And so we're prioritizing, parking cars versus prioritizing housing. So yeah,
And I think also, Josh, maybe that's what is actually in the proposal here. Then there was some prior discussion from committee members about doing more for single story, like having no side setback for a single story detached ADU. That's not reflected here, but that was something that some folks said that they would like to explore to further incentivize just doing one story. And that would just bring the rules direct for placement of an ADU right in line with what you could do with a garage.
So thanks, Rosemary. And I want to get to everyone, and I also want us to at least hear a couple minutes of Suburban before we wrap up for tonight and talk about next steps, because there's a lot here. But Renee, I think you had your hand up and it went down. Are you good for now?
Yeah, I'm good. I just put the comment in the chat.
Okay, perfect. And Tara, I saw your hand go up. Do you want to make a quick comment and then we'll go to the Suburban proposal?
Yeah, really quick. I was hoping for clarification on the possibility of going to the 0 foot rear setback for the non-garage door form. Is it possible, or have you thought about if half of the ADU doesn't have a garage door, are you going to allow that to go out to the 0 lot line? And if you haven't, that I just want to throw it out there because it's kind of in my head.
Yeah, we have considered that. It's a administrative challenge. I think, permitting, people want their permits sooner. Anything that complicates review for our team becomes challenging. But yeah, I think it does make for an interesting massing break and form shifts, but it's something that we can ask internally about.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So knowing that there may be more thoughts and comments and questions about this, but just for purposes of getting the full picture, let's go to Suburban.
Suburban, yeah. Now we'll get some backyard shots. This is what we're all excited about, right? Suburban context, we're looking at similar citywide goals here. Remove that minimum lot size. Flexibility for small lots, even though they're quite rare in the suburban context, as we'll see. Making single story ADUs easier to build, potentially even making single stories the only thing you can build in the suburban context. So creating those new suburban ADU zone districts with that context sensitive form standard, which includes lower height limits as far as stories and in feet. So here's a quick table proposal of the suburban zone districts. So everything in red here are new districts that don't exist today. So A1, D1, F1, and I1. F1 is the only one that does exist today, but it lives over here. We would shift that to an F2 and keep those allowances because it's a unique lot size. It was made for a unique part of town. Only about 1,000 of those properties exist. But the most common zone district in suburban is this D designation with 21,000 parcels. So the first 4 districts would be brand new. We'd be creating these, adding these to the code, copying a lot of the same rules that exist today, but being sensitive to that, the context, to the height, things that we've heard. So we're looking at lowering the height limit to be in only 1 stories. 17 feet tall would be the maximum. That's the equivalent of what you can build as a garage today. 17 feet tall, 1 story. We also heard that increasing the rear setback might have some real potential as far as those privacy concerns, pushing that unit away from the backyard, the neighboring backyard a little bit. So looking at a smaller equivalent setback on our smallest parcels, 5 feet for the SUA. Keep in mind, this is only 30 parcels in the entire city, so very rare that we'd ever see an ADU built there anyway. But everything else, we're looking at moving that rear setback to 7 feet. So that's where we are with that sort of context sensitive approach for this district. But once again, we'll take a look at some of the examples here. So that D zone district is our most common. So let's take a look at what a 1-story, 17-foot tall, 7-foot rear setback ADU might look like. Here's a quick view of the suburban context with a few ADUs sprinkled in, probably more than we'll ever see in one block or neighborhood, but just for shadow's sake, let's take a look. 1-story, 17 feet. So quick bird's eye view. Here's something from the sky, what you might see, like if we would ever see this many ADUs in one grouping. Put a few together here so we can get a good backyard perspective of what that might feel like. But the rules, we're only changing these sort of 6-line items. 1-story, 17 feet, no lot size minimum, everyone's eligible. Building coverage exception, which may or may not be a huge bump in this context, since you can cover 50% of your lot already. The lots are quite huge compared to the urban context. 7-foot setback, no building length. Here's an example of, us at a barbecue in the backyard here, and 2 of your neighbors have ADUs that are 1-story, 17 feet tall. So this really gives us that perspective of how much shadow impact, how much privacy. Is this any different than a simple accessory structure like a shed, like a garage that could be placed there today? Here's a quick shot from the street. So in a more low slung neighborhood, if your primary structures are shorter, older, single stories, and you do actually maximize that ADU at 17 feet, it could potentially be taller, but there's many examples of the split level where, that unit would be pretty hard to see behind one of these primary structures. Here's another example here of some of those. So we're asking you guys a question again. We'd love to discuss. Did we manage to sort of balance removing some of those barriers, allowing ADUs, creating those zone districts in the suburban context, but also remaining sensitive by adhering to those privacy concerns in this context?
So Josh, I see Councilwoman Black's hand up, and I also see a comment in the chat or a question from Michelle about whether it's a done deal basically in suburban neighborhoods to have the 1-story, and wondering if there can be some flexibility. So maybe we'll go to Councilwoman Black and then we can go to Michelle's question.
Thanks. Can you go back to your first slide?
How far you wanna go? Yep.
I think the one before that had the chart.
On the table, yeah.
Yeah. So if I thought this project was not looking at adding ADUs across the city, and so
No, we're just creating the zone districts that people can rezone into.
okay.
So these districts don't exist today, right? None of what's circled here exists. And so if you live in an SUD, but you want an ADU, you have to rezone into something, right? And we can't rezone you into a district that doesn't exist. So we're creating the zone district that you would come forth and request your rezoning to.
Okay, right, to get away from the waivers.
Definitely.
Exactly.
All right, and so I had a lot of other ideas for suburban that I've expressed before, that I don't know if you've just decided not to look at them and this is the direction we're going.
1-story, larger setback.
Well, I had a few ideas. I mean, 1-story was one idea. Another idea was that you could only have 2-story if you were in a neighborhood that had 2 stories. I mean, some suburban neighborhoods have covenants that you can only have a 1-story house. I guess those neighborhoods probably wouldn't let you have an ADU anyway, so I don't know that that would matter. Also, it's it's awkward to live in a suburban neighborhood and have a separate house. It's awkward how you would get to that house. So another idea would be to encourage more attached ADUs. And so anyway, there's a lot more to talk about here, but that setback from 5 feet to 7 feet, I think in a suburban neighborhood is really insignificant. I don't know that 7 feet actually achieves what I was looking at or hoping for. I don't think that is enough. So
Yeah, that's a
but
bit different than what we've heard from the Suburban focus group, where, yeah, we looked at 10 feet, 5 feet even. And so everyone said, there was no difference really between 10 and 5 as far as privacy impacts, the feel. When we looked at, this backyard perspective, we heard pretty clearly that, yeah, even, 5 feet didn't feel any different than 10 or 7, but we're looking to strike that balance and looking at 7 as far as, something that's still practical, buildable.
okay, well, that's great. I live in a suburban neighborhood, and I'm trying to speak for my constituents who live in suburban neighborhoods. So I don't know who was on that group, if those were people who live in suburban neighborhoods, but
yeah, it was a suburban context focus group. We can
yeah, it's sounding to me that, I mean, from this and also some earlier comments, that there may be some utility in having some more discussions just to add, if there's nuance to add and other input to add, but maybe we can come back to that in terms of possible next steps. I think it's good to get people's input even now. I don't think it's too late. But yeah, so thank you for that. And Rosemary, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Right, so I would like to also reflect Councilman Cashman's thoughts on this. I asked him what his thoughts were. And he really would prefer almost a requirement that ADUs be attached rather than detached. He thinks the 1 story, the 7 foot helps, but he feels that the 7 foot setback is still inadequate. So I'm relaying that. I'm channeling him.
Sure. Does anyone on the committee have a, proposal of what feels more appropriate? I mean, we can, at some point it's kind of like nothing's appropriate, only attached. And so if that's the battle that, we're trying to fight here, I think, we're supposed to be removing barriers. We want to create these opportunities for folks to provide housing. Yeah, how do we strike that balance? I'd love to hear from maybe other members of the committee that have feelings towards it.
Yeah, no, this is good to sort of be vetting all of this. And it looks like, Emily, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah,
Sarah.
so just from a more suburban perspective of people, and granted, I'm not a councilwoman that has constituents or anything like that, but of people in the Denver area in the suburban settings, I do know that people that I've spoken with would like less barriers and would like more ability to build ADUs. And the barriers, the zoning, all of those issues make it extremely difficult. And so I do just want to say that and remind everyone that though some constituents may feel a certain way in some areas, like Josh was saying, like that suburban focus group, that just might be their perspective. Because I know a lot of people in suburban Denver neighborhoods that want less barriers in building those ADUs. So just reminding people that, it may not be for everyone, but that's why we're doing all of this and removing the barriers and creating housing. If that's the goal, then I think we're on the right track from my perspective.
Thanks, Emily. Tara, go ahead.
Yeah, Emily, I think that's a good point, personally. And although I'm also wondering a couple things about the attached ADUs. I don't live in the suburban context. But I'm wondering if it's unlikely. Well, first of all, the suburban context doesn't have alleys generally. It's not on a street and alley grid. And most of these don't have kind of side loaded driveways back to detached ADUs. So in a lot of ways, the attached ADU makes a lot of sense just for access of it, but I'm also thinking about how, so if you were to rent out an ADU, I'm just wondering from a pragmatic perspective how people get to it if it's not attached. If you were to have a family member using that, then it wouldn't matter really whether it was attached or detached. So I think that flexibility is kind of important. So for what it's worth.
Thank you. And it sounds like there's interest. I saw a note from Michelle about possibly seeing more models of attached ADUs just to get a sense of what that looks like too.
Sure, yeah, we're getting a lot of interest in the attached. The attached ADU would follow the primary building form envelope, and so you could do something quite massive in that case. I mean, you could, triple the size of this house and put an ADU at the back of it. And so we're not proposing to, modify any of those rules. We can show that just to compare and contrast. You might want to see more detached ADUs after we show one of those possibly, but yeah, good thoughts.
Thank you. Renee, go ahead.
I do not live in a suburban district, and so I really appreciate hearing these. And Josh took the words out of my mouth. One of the things that we're seeing in District 3, when we do displacement analysis, and there's been 13,000 households displaced, the majority of them are going to District 2 and District 11. And what that means is, whereas right now we're seeing 50% of our households doubled up, that doubled up number is going to increase everywhere, and especially in those districts. And so to the extent that we can find a way to remove barriers for attached and detached ADUs, we're creating flexibility for housing for families who are on their way out of our city. And it's just really important. I just put an exclamation point on Emily's comments, and to Josh's. Sometimes attached ADUs get really, really big. And so we may want to look at what that what that could look like. And if you want to have detached be an option in those scenarios. Thanks. Thanks,
Renee.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think just a reminder that, while this isn't, a consensus requirement, this committee, this process, we're not trying to get, consensus recommendations that everyone is 100% on. I think this is exactly the kind of discussion we want to be having, so that the city, when it makes recommendations, can really be clear about, here are some upsides and downsides, here are some critiques and some arguments in favor, and here's how we think we're best likely to strike the balance with the input of all of you. So thanks for all the comments. I see a note from Sarah in the chat. Sarah, do you want to ask this question out loud, or make this comment out loud?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to confirm, like, with this, what we're looking at with these changes, that we aren't saying that, we're saying that you can still do an attached or a detached ADU, right? We're not limiting it to these can only be detached units, correct?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, once you're in the appropriate zone district, the accessory dwelling unit use is allowed in either form, so attached or detached. And yeah, it could be a basement, or it could be, an extension of an existing home, or it can be that detached separate structure.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, because it felt a little bit like the way the conversation was going is that we were saying, oh, these can only be detached units. And so just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
No, I think our, citywide guidance is clear that the housing options should be available. So I don't think we would go the direction of saying detached only or attached only in any part of the city. That wouldn't feel like an equitable approach.
And I just note, we have been talking so much about detached because that's where the rules are really special about, height and placement. And as Josh said, the rules about doing attached ADUs are the same as the rules for expanding your primary house, with the exception that there's still a limit on how much floor area it can be. And so, like, Josh, if you go back like one slide, just to confirm, the other direction, sorry, or more, to the table for Suburban, yeah, this one. So that row that's for use allowance, right? So this means that basically for an attached ADU, where this draft proposal stands, or for an attached ADU, there's no change at all, right, Josh, in the rules?
Right, yeah, the attached.
Suburban.
Exactly. The attached allowance is what is the percentage of the primary. So like 75% of the GFA of the primary. So if you have a, 4,000 square foot suburban home, which some people might, 75% of that could also be ADU to match. I mean, depending on your lot coverage. More practically, like 2,000 square feet.
But isn't the limit 1,000 square feet, like in you?
That's just for detached. No, sorry, that's just for.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So
detached.
Yeah, and I think like, it's really good, like what Councilman Black was bringing up about, potentially looking at contexts where there are a lot of two-story structures already as being a place for more flexibility, and whatever we could figure out to do about encouraging attached ADUs in the suburban context, although that may be a little challenging because it's already not very limited. But I think those are both like really good suggestions, because it definitely have the sense that there's more work to do in suburban probably than most other places based on this conversation, like just resolving that, like, yeah, some people are really concerned with height and privacy and placement and would support this one-story idea for detached, or to say, as Councilman Cashman was relaying through Rosemary, that you should not even be able to do them at all. You have to do it attached, versus, the other perspective, which we're definitely hearing as well, which is like, no, we need ADUs in suburban and we need to be removing barriers there as well. So yeah, more discussion needed, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I did misspeak there. Abe, you're correct. The single unit use allowance would be 1,000 square feet.
Okay. Right. So although like you could
attached.
tear down, the houses that we were looking at in the model and build really big houses under existing allowances, but it's not like 100% of what you were building could actually be an attached ADU, because there's still that square footage limit.
Yeah, we're hearing we should see examples of that, so I can do some modeling of that for next time.
Yep, perfect. And Michelle, your hand is up, and then maybe what we'll do is, Abe, I think I asked you if you could take a minute or two and summarize what you've noted down in terms of possible next steps and things you're hearing, and Josh, you as well, before we start wrapping up.
Yeah, so I won't take too much time. I just wanted to at least point out Gosha's comment about how, according to Blueprint Denver, where all neighborhoods have to absorb at least 20% of housing. And I just have to, I don't want to make assumptions, and I certainly don't want to make any criticisms, but I'm just curious, when that focus group was being asked, were they given this idea that this is going to be moving, and how do we want to really accept the 20% increase? And sometimes this is what can happen if it's attached. This is what can happen when it's detached, and really just, I get concerned about hearing no sort of that NIMBY, we're going to give you a 0% chance of ever passing anything in this community. And so I just wanted to at least highlight what Gosha said, but also ask if that was a part of the calculus when presented to the group that was looking at this as far as the suburban focus group.
Thanks, Michelle. Thoughts, just responses to that?
Yeah, you're talking about the blueprint guidance recommendation. Yeah,
Yeah, and whether the folks who have been weighing in have had a sense that there is going to be some need to absorb, and the question is how to best do it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we try to have that discussion every time we're out in the public, remind people that, this guidance, this entire project is coming from Blueprint Denver, from specific recommendations within the plan, and that its goal is to house people, be inclusive and equitable and sustainable. And yeah, we all have this obligation to, absorb some of that growth that is coming. And so there's still always, more education that needs to be done throughout the city on that aspect. But yeah, we definitely try to tee up these discussions with that perspective.
Councilwoman Black, do you want to chime in here and then we'll go to a wrap up?
Yeah, I have a few things to say about some of those comments. So I voted on Blueprint Denver, so I'm well aware of it. But I thought the goal of this committee was to look at building forms. And so just because we're looking at building forms doesn't mean that we're erecting barriers. There are barriers now. And so by looking at building forms that people can get behind, we are eliminating some of those barriers. So I don't believe we are erecting barriers. I think that we are looking at building forms that community members can get behind. Because in the end, city council is going to have to vote for this. And so if there are recommendations made that council members don't support, then they won't vote for it. So I just think everyone should take note of that.
Yeah, we certainly are at the will of council votes. And so, yeah, do you have a perspective on, something in these recommendations that wouldn't fly? I mean, you think a 7-foot setback is inappropriate, or, what should this committee be discussing? Which, how do we weigh these pros and cons? We'd love to hear some solutions, right?
And maybe just in terms of what I've been hearing from tonight's meeting, it does seem like this is, if there's, there is, I think, going to be follow-up between now and the October meeting to refine some of these ideas, and that having some discussions around that kind of question, Josh, is probably a really good idea in light of some of the nuances that have been raised tonight. So maybe that can be one of the next steps. Do you all want to take a stab, city staff, at articulating some of the things that you're hearing in terms of possible next steps in the next few weeks? Or do you need some time to sort of digest? Obviously, there's a lot of substantive input to digest.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of trying to have a little bit more focused discussion, especially about the suburban neighborhood context, and also just making sure that we're getting folks in the room, who may be really concerned about privacy, even in the urban neighborhood context, just to kind of workshop like what really is going to be most effective to address those concerns while going with the other objectives of the project. And so, like, hopefully we can arrange to like have some of those discussions ideally before the next committee meeting so that we can relay that information. And then I also wonder if, like, we can reach out, all the committee members would be welcome to attend these meetings. And, for example, it might be helpful, Councilwoman Black, if you wanted to attend 1 or 2 of the suburban meetings, we could like set it up in your district just to kind of talk through how we balance the height and placement of an ADU in the suburban context without creating barriers that are kind of too difficult to overcome, which is kind of the other concern that we've heard. And then also just another thing would be that to really summarize where we are with the strategy. And I think, what our plan is to have like a preliminary strategy, like recommended strategy report that we would send out in advance of the next meeting, so that you would see the kind of information that you saw in the presentation here, along with quite a few visuals, with a little bit more time to digest, and then we'll have a discussion again. And that's a good chance to note that, like, to Michelle's point, you know, she maybe missed the conversation that led to the 1-story ADU limit proposal, which is quite uncertain, as we've discussed. And just want to note that it's like, yes, everything's still open for discussion, and certainly would be, you know, right up until the point that we actually entered the adoption process with a proposed amendment to the zoning code, which is at least a couple months away at this point.
And Josh and Abe, just a quick question. I mean, I know that we're planning on having an advisory group meeting in a month. Is there any reason to push that out to allow time to have some of these discussions, or do you want to follow up with the group just in terms of what that expectation should be? And with the benefit of the online survey, just to a note Rosemary just put in the chat as well.
Yeah, I think we're still waiting on quite a bit of those results. I mean, it's interesting, you know, we're hearing a lot, obviously both sides of the story, right? A lot of folks think we should create some more equity by allowing 2 stories in suburban districts. You know, like why shouldn't someone that wants one appropriately be able to build one in that context if they're on a corner lot and they have a large house? And so, yeah, I mean, these are complicated things that we're trying to deal with as staff and understand, and with your help of the committees. And yeah, we're looking closely. We'd love to hear more from those constituents, folks in the suburban context that have those concerns, and hopefully they're taking the survey. Hopefully everyone's out there promoting those thoughts. But yeah, we'd love to get more feedback, but I think it might take a little more internal discussion for us to figure out what meetings to set up.
Okay, that sounds good. So I think for everybody, just in terms of next steps on these strategies you've heard tonight, based on this conversation, you know, stay tuned to hear from staff about the proposed timeline, and that incorporates some of these next steps. And also it does sound like, as much as possible, to have your constituents and networks take the survey just to get more input. That's helpful. I think with that, Josh, do you want to sort of wrap us up into what comes next?
Yeah, so we'll go back to the drawing board on some things here, right? Sadly, I don't know, it feels like we took a step backwards tonight a little bit, bluntly. But yeah, it sounds like we need to do more testing, right? More proving out, more talking to some of these districts now that we have examples of, you know, what might be proposed. But we're looking at having that next committee meeting first week in October. It's another round of these strategy meetings. So today we looked at a bit of a draft strategy. We'll look a little bit more at finalizing that strategy in the next meeting. Hope to have some engaging conversations between now and then. But we will finally come up with some recommendations beyond that at the end of October, go back out to the public again with sort of those recommendations, and keep moving through to our last committee meeting in November. But yeah, that's where we are for tonight. I guess we spent a lot of time in the middle there. Sorry for going long, but the discussion was great. So yeah, we'll continue to press here. We'll continue to have conversations with folks, look at setting up more of those focus group discussions as needed, get more input. We'll be closing the survey on the 16th, so another week out. So there's still plenty of time to get feedback there. And there is open comment forums to where we can get a real perspective of people's interests. But yeah, we'll be looking forward to finalizing some of the strategy solutions by October.
And I just to the comments of, you know, I think this is not uncommon that as we get to actual concrete possibilities, that it starts to raise sort of some final concerns, or address, you know, raise some nuances that need to be looked at in order to tailor some things. So I do think, while you know, that we heard comments that tonight that we maybe, you know, you haven't been hearing as much, I think it's still really useful just in terms of getting something that is the best product it can be. So anyway, I think thank you to staff, and thank you for all of the committee comments and questions. I promised that we were gonna have a chance to hear from members of the public for a few minutes here at the end. I am not seeing hands up, but I'm wondering if anyone from the public wants to ask a question or make a comment real quick before we hop off. I'm not seeing it. Okay, I just want to make sure you all had a chance, and just again, there has been a Q&A session in the public part of this meeting that we will make sure to include in the webinar, in the meeting notes. Okay, so thanks everybody, and I think that the city will be in touch in the coming couple weeks to just let you know what to expect for next steps.
Yeah, thanks a bunch.
Yeah, thanks everybody so much. Have a really good night.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.